Hello, I'm Amanda Jones and I'm interviewing John Lampen today, who's a long-standing trustee of the Quaker Arts Network. So, welcome, John, and thank you for joining me in this interview. Got some questions for you. So, when did you become a Quaker? How did you first learn about Quakers?
Right. Well, I was a sort of lifetime I was born into the Church of England, and I didn't leave it at university. We had a very active Christian group in my college, which actually helped me choose the direction of my career. And when my wife and I started work at a school in the country in Shropshire, and we ran the village Sunday school and everything. But we were both getting more and more disconnected from all those words and from singing hymns, which, like George Fox once said, whose sentiments weren't necessarily ours.
Yeah.
And we were talking to my mother one day when we were staying, who was also a staunch Anglican, and she said, "You sound just like a couple of Quakers." And we went to our first Quaker meeting with her next day down in Dorking. And we all had a really meaningful experience. And then it was a process of disengaging ourselves from our Anglican commitments and gradually moving towards membership 3 or 4 years later.
Mm. And how long ago was that? That was...
Oh, goodness, we were both in our 20s, and I'm going to be 85 next week, so a long time ago.
It's very interesting how we all get drawn to Quakerism similarly. Yeah. So if you look back over the years, what have been your most memorable moments in your Quakerism?
I think the most important thing, which isn't exactly a moment, has been the gradual process in relation to beliefs and dogma. Like our friend Paul Oistreicher says, as I get older, I believe more and more strongly in fewer and fewer things.
Mm.
That's been the experience both of Diana and me.
Mm. Our values.
That's the main thing. I mean, something that other people might think was obviously very important, but it came very naturally to us, was having an absolutely unmistakable leading to go and work in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Even though we didn't have a job waiting for us, we didn't know what we would do. And we had 2 youngish boys in the family. Our daughters had grown up. So that sense that you need to be there is, I suppose, a memorable Quaker point.
Have you travelled a lot with your Quakerism?
Well, up to the time we went to live in Northern Ireland, I would say not at all. We took a very occasional holidays abroad, but we couldn't afford it often. In Northern Ireland, a lot of people came from other conflict areas in the world, and they wanted to see not only what was happening in Northern Ireland and how it had all started, but also what small groups like the one we belonged to in Londonderry or Derry were doing for peace. And this led to invitations to Russia, and we worked for many years in former Soviet countries later, visit to Uganda, which QPS asked me to do because we were developing peace education in Northern Ireland, and people wanted to see it. And a bit later, former Yugoslavia. And before we went to Northern Ireland, a small trust that sent people to South Africa during the apartheid years sent us there for 3 months, and we made a number of visits afterwards. So it was only really towards the end of the 11 years we had in Ireland that we began to become sort of more international travelers. Mostly not to other Quakers, though. We did go to some overseas Quakers conferences and yearly meetings and to American Quaker colleges. But most of it was working with people who might be Muslims or former communists and atheists and so on and so on.
Yeah, it's very, very good, valuable work. Did you go to Quaker schools as well?
We've only once or twice actually done something in a Quaker school in England.
Okay.
And once at a summer school that was in a Quaker school, but was broader than that. No, very, very little connection with them, but quite a lot of connection with peace education projects that started in England. A few predated our return from Ireland, but others, particularly the one up in Middlesborough, they employed us to come for several weeks, quite long periods, in order to help them get started.
Wow, yeah. So what's your interest in creativity and the arts?
Well, our friend Ormerod Greenwood, who was a well-known Quaker when we joined Friends, used to say, God intended me to be a poet, but he changed his mind at the last moment. And I have a bit of that feeling. My mother was a very accomplished artist, particularly portrait painter, and I never felt I could measure up to her. And therefore, through a great deal of my life, I neither wrote poetry nor did anything in the visual arts. There was a spell when I wrote a little bit of music, which I enjoyed, although I have no musical training. But then I went, after we came back, just in case anyone's confused, we went to Northern Ireland in 1983 and we came back in 1994. And a few years after that, I went to Woodbrooke and did a course in Chinese painting.
Oh, wow.
Not the sort of 3 brushstrokes and you've got a horse, but what they call the meticulous style. And that somehow got me feeling that I can paint if I want to. And so I started doing that. But Chinese painting in that way takes a lot of time and concentration. And so not long after, I also started doing quick sketches as I was around. And so what I've mainly been doing, apart from a few experiments, is I've been mainly doing pen and ink drawings. I usually draw a very quick sketch on the spot in pencil in 2 or 3 minutes and ink it at home and develop it, taking a photo if it's very complicated to help me. And Chinese paintings and occasionally other paintings. And something I've always liked doing, but I seldom had the opportunity, which predates the Woodbrooke course, I suppose, is I do like doing clay sculpture.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Usually tiny ones. I put one little figure in some pictures, which you could have to show. But Dan and I volunteer with Crisis at Christmas and go and do things on their events around Christmas. And what I tend to do is help people with clay modeling.
Okay.
And so, although I don't do a lot myself, I do have enough skill to help other people.
And do you like to paint landscapes or portraits or?
Well, particularly with pen and ink, which is how most of my landscapes come out, it's very difficult to make a good, convincing drawing of a wide landscape. In one way, there's so much there, and in another way, there's so much emptiness. And it's very difficult to get the balance right. So I occasionally draw a big landscape. And if I'm out, I'm far more likely to draw a single pile of rocks or tree or something than a broad sweep.
Okay, that's brilliant. So how from your creativity, how are you involved in the Quaker Arts Network and what drew you to it?
Could I just say something a little bit more about the creative side
Yeah,
first?
of course you
Because we
can.
might not manage to get back to it.
Yeah.
Drawing for me, or painting, or modeling, I wouldn't directly call it a form of worship, but it's an activity which helps me in the way that worship does. And the reason is I'm really a pretty verbal person, and I'm a very quick thinker. So I sort of come up with ideas before the poor person who's asking for advice has finished speaking. At least I try not to, but I have a tendency to. And so drawing takes me into a completely different mode of thinking, which is partly exercise for my mind and it's partly rest for my mind. And so it is a spiritual practice, even though I would say worship is a different spiritual practice. And in that way, it's important to me. And the liberating thing about this is that you don't worry about how good your work is, because you're not doing it for that reason. You're doing it for what it gives you as you work, and not because you want the world to see it.
Yeah. Do you find do you find the same in your sculpture and your music and your writing?
Yes. Writing music is a little bit different. And I haven't written anything for a long. Well, I just write one song. I think it's a song which I can send you if you're any way of attaching it to this.
Yeah, we'll include it.
It doesn't matter if you don't, but it's that's a little bit different. But with drawing, Michelangelo once said that drawing is the intellectual side of art and colour is the emotional side.
Oh, that's interesting.
But although it's not 100% true, I think there's a lot of truth in it. Drawing, you have to discover how I sometimes think of it as calligraphy. Expresses something which is actually solid and three-dimensional and colours and everything else. And so your mind is working on how do I translate that into a simple line, because I use very little shading in my drawing. I do have a set of sort of grey smudgy felt pens in different hues, and I do sometimes use them. But the majority of my drawings, if I want to suggest form or shadow, I do it just by hatching, by line stroke. And so it's a real exercise of the mind, but not the same exercise as thinking out a problem of behavior or an intellectual problem of another sort.
And do you become really immersed in what you're doing? Does it work as a mindful activity as well as a spiritual one?
It's got to be mindful to be worth doing. Just occasionally, I might have got all the outlines in place and know just where I'm going. And there might be a stage that's rather mechanical in which I could do while there's music on or something else, or even talk on the radio. But most of it not.
Okay. So how did you become involved in the Quaker Arts Network?
I can't quite remember. Linda might. I think she possibly approached me, or perhaps it was just something they put out that approached me. And well, I just sort of thought, as I'm trying to cut down on other more official activities and so on, this might be something I could help with. So I was invited to a meeting, and I said to her, I don't want to become part of the functioning part of this very much. I think that now that I'm over 80, I don't need to do that anymore. But if you want a sort of somebody with ideas and somebody who can contribute to other people's ideas when we've got something on, then I'd be happy to join. So what I like about having been in Quaker Arts Network is the opportunities that have been given me, like to run a Christmas program, well, a New Year celebration program of poetry, reading and music and all sorts of other things, and to run an online concert of Quaker singer-songwriters.
Yeah.
And it was I who first suggested the alphabet book, the first book that the Lampen Project put out. And that's where I sort of feel I belong.
Yeah.
I did do a stint as Quaker Arts Network treasurer when things looked a bit desperate for volunteers. But I'm not one of nature's treasurers.
No.
I'm very, very grateful that Jerry's taken it over. It was beginning to cost me time to do things inefficiently that someone else has done quickly and well.
So how long has it been since you've been with the network? Is it, so I'm trying
I think it's about 5 years.
About 5 years, yeah.
I think
amazing. So, yeah. Okay, that's brilliant. Do you think the arts themselves have changed over time?
Well, clearly Quaker attitudes to the arts have changed over time.
Yeah.
And particularly music. I actually wrote a chapter about the changing Quaker attitudes to music in a Quaker book I wrote. Because I think people don't understand it. They just think we were awfully Philistine. And then we saw the error of our ways. Whereas, of course, when you look into it, it's a much more nuanced story than that. But certainly there's been a change in the attitude of Quakers in general, and the feeling now. I think you'd find very, very few Quakers who find anything uneasy about music. In Grange meeting in Northern Ireland, which is a small, very evangelical meeting, unprogrammed, but it would be very unfamiliar to most English friends. In Grange, they loved singing hymns, and so they bought a little organ or harmonium, but with an absolute insistence by most members of the meeting that they would never be, it would never be played during meeting for worship. So that Grange meeting for worship finishes, and then they sing a hymn or two before noticing.
That's quite nice.
And so something there is lingering of the old Quaker mistrust music. But the Friends School in Lisbon, they had a brilliant girl, not a Quaker, who wanted to continue her piano studies, and they didn't want to lose her. And there were agonized discussions, and finally she, one of the staff members bought a piano and had it in their house. She went there to do her piano practice, and honour was somehow saved. But if you think, I mean, that, I suppose that's 100 years ago now, but I mean, that's a massive change to Quaker attitudes to music now.
Yeah, it's incredible, really. I mean, I'm thinking as well about how schools are less focused on the arts now, and you know how it used to be much more of a creative culture in schools and things. Okay.
Just don't get me on to my feelings about what happens in schools, or you'll have a lot of it with you on your hands.
You mentioned your Quaker Quicks books. So what have you written about in those?
Well, I haven't, they don't touch very much on the arts, but in the two, in the one about the history of Quaker testimonies, there's a whole chapter on Quaker attitudes to the arts from the beginning down to the present day, particularly focusing on music, because that's the one that's notorious. And Diana and I just brought out a Quaker Quicks called Inner Healing, Inner Peace. One of those chapters is called Nature, Time and Art. And that's about the spiritual nourishment that art can give us, either contemplating it or doing it.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you have a favourite art or skill?
Well, I'm not sure about this. I think that really my skill is with words.
Yeah, okay.
And mostly it's been, most of my writing has been for friends, and it's mostly been sort of, I would call it popular scholarly. But I do write quite a lot of poetry, which I mostly just keep to myself, show a few
Yeah.
friends. And I've written a novel, which I'm rather proud of, because it's been very well received, including by teenage girls, because it's not only the story of a teenage girl, but it's told in the voice of a teenage girl.
Oh, how interesting. What's it about?
It's about coming through grief.
Mm,
The heroine's best friend has
mm,
died of cancer.
mm.
And I didn't think of it as being explicitly a Quaker book at all, but I didn't really know where it was going. When I wrote it, I'll just show
Yeah.
anyone who wants to see, that's
Oh,
the book.
wonderful.
That's Sophie. I don't know if it'll come out in looking glass writing on the recording. And I had the first paragraph, and that was all. And it was almost as though Hester was sitting next to me telling me what to write.
Mm.
And the book does move in a Quakerly direction, but I never knew it was going to when I started.
It's amazing when words do that and they just flow from you, isn't it? It's, yeah. Special.
And because my other prose books have been thought out kind of books, it was a very different way to write, and I love doing it.
Do you have any more books there to show us?
Well, not really, not unless I ran around. This one's on my desk because I'm about to mail it to someone.
Oh. I love seeing the covers.
But I think I would recommend it because so many people have loved it. Some said they made them cry. And I sent a copy to a girl, an 18-year-old girl in Uganda, who's a great friend of mine, and her younger sister wrote it. Sorry, read it. And was so inspired that she sat down and wrote a novel.
Did she read?
Yes, I've read it too. And I must say, this girl, Sifa, who wrote the novel, she's a brilliant writer. The plot is absurdly gothic, but the way she brings situations and dialogue to life. I was able to sit with her and read it and then give her a lot of encouragement.
Yeah, that's the wonderful thing about Quakerism and writing, encouragement and inspiration, and helping other people. Which Quaker Arts Network projects are your most memorable and why? I know you're involved in the new George Fox 400th anniversary project as well. So
I'm sort of quite excited about that at the moment because besides the fact that it's now set up and a couple of little films have already come in to get us started, including one of yours, for which many.
I'm looking forward
but in addition to that, over the next couple of months, we shall be making I shall be making an animated film with our children's meeting in our
lovely
home, and so I'll have a sort of input at the coal face as well as keeping an eye on the whole thing. So yes, I'm very keen on that. The exhibition that we did at Swarthmore Hall at the annual meeting, 4 or 5 years ago now. That was great fun. I didn't have a great deal to do with curating the exhibition. It was partly great fun because I did a whole album of paintings about Antarctica, and they accepted that. That was nice. The pictures that I'm sending you, there's a couple of the Antarctica ones in there.
I should think that's quite interesting because of the light in Antarctica and the whiteness, and it must
Certainly.
yeah.
And the dark as well.
Yeah.
6 months of night. Yes, I always wanted to go. I was fascinated by the stories when I was a boy. And so in the end, the best I could do was go with my paintbrush in my mind.
Wonderful. And where do you see the Quaker Arts Network in the future?
Well, there was one when we first joined Friends. I forget the exact title. It brought out a lovely quarterly magazine called Renard, which I take it was a reference to George Fox.
Yeah.
And it had lovely man Ben Vincent behind it, very amusing Quaker, and also a bit of a rebel, like perhaps Linda is. He told me he was the first Quaker, as far as he knew, who had ever exhibited a nude painting. This would be in the 1960s.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, and that sort of went on for a while and then couldn't sustain itself and died. And then Quaker Arts Network started recently, fairly recently, and fills that role very well at the moment. But I think I'm quite philosophical about the life and death of institutions.
Yeah.
I'm in favor of laying things down when they're not mustering. Well, I don't want any organization, Quakerly or other, to exist as it were on blood transfusion.
Yes.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's got to have the energy and the dynamic to continue. So that if a day came when QAN just couldn't assemble a committee and didn't have the energy among its members to put on events, I would be sad, but not horrified if it went, knowing that at some point in the further future, provided friends survive, something would renew itself and come up again.
Yeah.
One of the quotations I like from Jesus is where he says to the Jews, God is able from the stones to raise up children unto Abraham. In other words, if you don't do the job, never mind. It will get done.
Yes.
And I feel that with the spirit. I feel it with Quakers as a whole. As if Quakers as an institution dwindled and became nothing much. Never mind, the spirit doesn't need Quakers, even if it's using them at the moment.
No, that's very true, John. Yeah.
So my philosophy about the future of QAN is be there, put all the energy into it you can, keep it going as long as it really looks viable. And if you need to lay it down with a sense of gratitude and not feeling this is a tragedy.
Yes. Well, that has been absolutely wonderful, John, to hear about all your inspirations and intuition into the arts and Quakerism. Have you got any more things you'd like to talk about?
I think we've covered things that I thought about beforehand. You can always get me talking, but that feels like quite a nice conversation and not too huge when you try and get it down on screen or paper.
No, that's been lovely. Well, thank you ever so much, John, for joining me in the interview. And we look forward to doing some more interviews, and I will put this together. Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.
When you see the young man begging in the gutter, and you find that you condemn him in your mind, thinking he could work as well as you or better, and there is let the